We'll get underway. Hi, everybody.
And I just want to make sure that Maureen's got the recording going. Yep. Okay.
Right. So this is a whole different ballgame for us to talk to Christina Lake at budget time. And I, quite frankly, everybody really miss not being able to see your faces. I love this, this way of chatting with you every year. So regional district always these days starts out their meetings and their presentations with a land acknowledgement. So we're going to start that way, and then I'm going to turn this over to the panelists to introduce themselves. And then after that, we'll turn it over to Mark Anderson, our CAO, who will actually start the presentation. So our land acknowledgement, we acknowledge and appreciate the land on which we gather is the converging traditional and unceded territory of the Silts, Sekopemk, Sinik, Kanaha peoples, as well as the Métis peoples, whose footsteps have also marked these lands. So once again, thanks everybody for being here. We've had a really good turnout for this, and I'm really impressed, quite frankly, that we've had so many of you who are willing to join us this way. And unfortunately, with the pandemic, we have no choice. So from here, I would turn it back to Francis, who will lead everyone through their introductions. And then Mark, if you'll just jump in after that and start the presentation, that'll be tickety-boo, and I'll get to chat with you guys later. So here you go.
Thank you, Grace. And maybe I'll start, everybody has their tiles arranged differently, but we'll start with the introductions, and then I'll go through a few Zoom tips for the people. Most people may have been exposed to Zoom at this point who are attending the meeting. Some of you may not. And we also have somebody online here that's going to introduce themselves that can help with technical issues should they occur. So I'll start with myself. My name is Frances Micah. I'm the Corporate Communications Officer for the Regional District of Kootenay-Boundary. And I'm kind of the overall just sort of moderator tonight, just to make sure that we follow the process and the agenda. And I'll turn it over to Mark Anderson.
And I am Mark Anderson, CAO with the Regional District.
Okay, and then we'll go down, I'll just go down the screen how I see it. We've got Maureen Forster next.
Hi folks, I'm Maureen Forster. I'm the Executive Assistant.
And what's your role tonight, Maureen?
Well, oh yes, very important question. My role is keeping track of all the questions that the audience is going to be asking, and we will touch on them a little bit later on in the presentation.
And we're recording it. Everyone needs to know that.
Absolutely.
Okay, and I'm going to move over from Maureen to Janine.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for making the effort to join us tonight. I'm Janine, GM of Environmental Services, and I'm going to have a little bit of a presentation tonight on the milfoil program, but I'm also here to answer any questions if anybody has any on such things as waste management, mosquito control, invasive plants, and those sort of things. So happy to be here tonight and hopefully give you guys some entertaining information. Thank you.
Thanks, Janine. And actually, Grace, you're just down from there, so you should formally introduce yourself as well.
I'm happy to. I'm Grace McGregor, and I'm the Regional District Director for Christina Lake, and I've been here for 15 years, and I love it here, and I love the people, so I miss you all.
Thanks, Grace, and then over to Donna.
Hello, my name is Donna Dean. I'm the Manager of Planning and Development.
Okay, and Barb Island.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Barb Island. I am the General Manager of Finance and Chief Financial Officer for the RDKB, and I'm here to assist with any financial questions that you may have that come up today. Thank you.
Okay, and over from Barb on my screen is Diane, Chair Langman.
Hi everyone, Diane Langman here. I'm the Mayor of the Village of Warfield and also the Chair of the Regional District of Kootenay-Boundary. Happy to be here to support Director McGregor and my close friend and peer, and also Vice Chair. Thanks for attending today, and I'm looking forward to hearing what Christina Lake has to say this evening.
Thank you, Diane. And then we're over to Chief Joe Geary, who's muted.
There we go. Hello, everybody. My name is Joe Geary. I'm the fire chief for Christina Lake. And I'm here tonight to answer any questions about the fire department.
Thanks, Joe. And Freya.
Good evening, I'm Freya Phillips. I'm the Senior Energy Specialist with the RDKB, and I'm here to answer any questions with regard to climate and energy.
Thanks, Freya. And then Goran Dankovsky.
I'm Goran Dankovsky, Manager of Infrastructure, and I could here to answer any questions about water utilities and any sustainability initiatives.
Thanks, Goran. And over from Goran, we have Mark Stevens.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mark Stevens. I'm the Manager of Emergency Programs for the Regional District. I'll be happy to answer any questions about emergency management within the Regional District.
Thanks, Mark. And down from Mark is Deputy CAO James Chandler.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Yeah, General Manager of Operations and Deputy CAO. I'm here this evening to hear what questions you've all got, specifically answer anything regarding transit, support our chief about the fire department, and then maybe if there's any other questions, other services such as recreation, we can take those too. Thank you.
And last on my screen, but by no means least, is Dale Green. And Dale, if you could mention what your role is tonight too, please.
Yeah, I was going to try and hide, but my role is strictly technical tonight. So my name is Dale Green. I'm Manager of Information Technology, and I'm really just here to make sure that this meeting goes smoothly, the plumbing bits, so don't ask me any questions about the lake.
And by what means can people get technical help tonight, Dale?
I'm keeping an eye on the chat specifically, so it's important to distinguish between the chat function and the Q&A. The Q&A is for questions for the rest of the panelists who are the subject matter experts. The chat, if we could reserve that strictly for technical support, then that would be terrific, although I will be happy to forward any queries for the subject matter experts that do show up in the chat. So either mechanism would be fine.
Great. Thanks, Dale. And then I'll just quickly go over a couple of Zoom things before we get into the presentation itself. And that's that for all the attendees, varying level of skill and knowledge, and I'm sure some of you are much more expert at this than I. But at the bottom of your screen, you're going to see a Q&A symbol that looks like a kind of a little sort of comment bubble. That's, if you click on that, you can type in a question. That'll be seen by everybody else at the presentation. Just like we're at a meeting, all the questions are visible. Anybody can see them, and just as we would if you put your hand up at a public meeting. And Maureen's going to keep track of those questions. We're going to try to address them a little bit by section of the presentation. So for example, we're starting with some of the financial stuff. If there's financial related questions, we'll try to deal with as many of those as we can before we move on to the other topics. And at any point, if we have missed your questions or something technical happens where you have to leave Zoom, this is being recorded. It's going to be available on Join the Conversation or engagement site. And we will also have a record of all the questions that have been asked, and we'll follow up. So no question will comment or such will be lost. We'll capture all of those. The other thing you're going to notice is, as Dale mentioned, there's a chat. So the Q&A has two little kind of thought bubbles, kind of comment bubbles, one in front of the other. It says Q&A. The chat has one, and it just says chat. And that's for technical issues, as Dale mentioned. Like you don't know how to do something, I can't make this work, and we'll do our best to assist you as we can with that while the presentation is going on. Other than that, if someone right now, we just use the Q&A function, which is typing. If someone really wants to speak, I can promote you to a panel, what we call a panelist in Zoom, so that you can have visual and able to speak. So if that's something that's imperative that you feel you want to do, please put that in the Q&A and we'll address that. The last thing I'll mention is that you're going to see some polling questions come up. So at different points in the presentation, we're asking you something, like just something that we'd like to know about that helps us during the presentation. So please participate in those if you can, and that's also captured and gives us some information from you. So with that, we're slated right now, we started at 6. We've got a 2-hour time slot. We don't know if we're going to take that full time. This is an absolute new new thing for the regional district. So let's get to it and welcome everybody, and thanks for coming in with that. Okay, I am just going to go to a first poll. So if you can take a moment, attendees, we want to know which best describes you. You live in Christina Lake year-round? You live in Christina Lake part of the year? You live somewhere other than Christina Lake? There could be people attending from outside the area. And then I see people are already answering the second question. I'll give it a bit here to keep track of the numbers and how many people have had a chance to vote. And then I will share those results. Another few seconds here. We've still got responses coming in. And that looks to be it. So I'm going to, oh, we got one. Oh, no, we got two more. Once I spoke too soon. Okay. There we go. So most people, 70% live in Christina Lake year-round, 18% part-time, 13% live somewhere other than Christina Lake. What are you most interested in? Taxes and spending is the leader, with services close behind that. So I'm sure Mark is taking note of that for the presentation. Okay, and I'm going to stop there.
Okay, I will start here.
There are some Q&As down there, so we might want to pay attention to those at some point.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Grace, for pointing that one out. The RDKB's got a population of 31,000 as shown here, and about 10%, or about 5% rather, 1,337 residents, 4% rather, of the population of the entire regional district are within Christina Lake area. Now, Francis, was this a polling question? Are we providing?
It used to be, but I have another question coming up.
Okay, we've changed the polling questions. All right, just to give you a sense of the geography, Area C represents about 6% of the entire regional district land area. The assessed value is 12% of the entire assessed value throughout the regional district. And the 1,366 residences within, or dwellings rather, within Area C are representing 8% of the entire dwelling count for the regional district of Kootenay Boundary. Now we've got the skill testing poll.
Okay, what interests you most today in the 2021 budget? Just give us an idea what you want us to spend time on. Okay, I'm seeing responses still coming in. A lot of really good questions coming in on the Q&A as well that we'll get to. And that looks to be it. So it looks like the greatest interest is type of expenditures. What are we spending money on, Mark? And proposed taxation comes in as a close second.
Great. Well, that's the type of information we're looking for. So as I start into the budget information now, I'll just scale back a bit here. I'm looking at the list of attendees, and I see a lot of familiar names there. I know a lot of you have attended these in the past. Over the last couple of years, we've tried to scale back the presentation really to focus on the budget. So we've heard through the polling in the last few years that that's what really people are interested in. So those of you who've been around for a while will recognize that we haven't talked a lot about the structure of the regional district and the types of services provided by the regional district as a whole. Really, we're focusing on the budget and 5-year financial plan. We're right in the middle of the process of developing that plan. And a lot of these budgets at this point are fluid. And so at this point, we would very much welcome any input we get from you folks at Christina Lake to let us know whether we're on the right track. And unfortunately, as Grace alluded to tonight, we're doing this virtually. It's a lot nicer to do it face-to-face in the Christina Lake Community Hall, where we can chat informally and get a good sense of what people's feelings are on issues, but we'll hopefully get the best result we can with the virtual technology. So moving on to the budget, the graph that you're seeing in front of you shows our entire budget over the last 10 years in the blue bars. So you're seeing from 2011 to 2021, the entire regional district budget has grown considerably, up to 53 million in dollars proposed for 2021. Taxation is shown in the green bars. So taxation relative to the entire budget has been much slower in terms of the growth. So we've gone from about 17,000 to 17 million to 23 million over the course of 10 years versus 32 million to 53 million in total budget. The reason for that is that we've got a lot of other sources of revenue these days, and primarily grants. We've got a lot of grant applications for major infrastructure projects that are shown in the 2021 budget numbers here that are represented by the blue bar. And over the last several years, we've been able to successfully access a number of federal and provincial grants, as well as other forms of revenue other than taxation. And some of those include things like user fees. When you go to the landfill site and they're paying tipping fees, that's a user fee that's separate from taxation. So that would fall under the blue bar, not under the green. Francis, another question?
One moment here. So we're interested in which services matter to you the most right now, because we're going to look a little bit about at some of those costs and the budget for those services available. Got about half the responses in that we need, or that were coming in. Another moment. And there we go.
Development.
So top of the list, planning and development, followed by water system, by recreation and culture, then water systems, and the other, but interest in a broad range of services.
Okay, thanks, Francis. So the two pie graphs you've got in front of you show the tax allocation. And the one on the left is the allocation between local government tax versus provincial tax versus other agencies, including the hospital district. So of your entire rural tax bill, the regional district tax represents 59% of that bill. The total provincial rural tax is 36.94, and the rest is taken up by the regional hospital district, 3.13, and other agencies. And other agencies are organizations like the BC Assessment Authority that provide value assessments on your home and property. On the lower list, and the second pie chart to the right, it shows the allocation of taxation between the 24 services that electoral area C participates in. And that text is fairly small, but I'll just go through a number of them, working from the bottom. So that the greatest component of your tax bill, if you're serviced by the Christina Lake water system, is that at 23.21%, and that's funded through a parcel tax, which isn't changing or proposed to be changing in 2021. It's remaining constant from last year. Christina Lake Fire represents the second largest component of your tax bill at 9.21%. Then Area C Regional Parks and Trails at 4.84%. Milfoil Control at 4.67%. Grand Forks Library at 2.53%, and then they progressively get smaller as we move through the other services. In terms of revenue, this shows the revenue composition of all of our revenue sources that come to the regional district. So you'll see in the light blue, the electoral area tax levy represents 24% of the taxes that we generate, and then 20.13 come from our member municipalities. Then the remainder come from other sources, sale of services, so user fees, municipal debentures, other governments, reserve funds, prior year surplus, board fees, etc. And then on the expense side, this shows a fairly good picture of where the expenses go among the various types of services or categories of services, with recreation and culture being at 20%, development services 6%, environmental health services at 33%, protective services at 22%, general government services 11%, and so on. At this point, I'm going to stop sharing that screen and move on to a more detailed budget. So I will share with you. One moment, please.
Just while you're getting that organized, Mark, we had a number of questions about how many participants are here tonight.
Sure.
And I see that Maureen's been great about answering that. It looks like we've got about 46 attendees and then 14 panelists, so there's a total of 60 participants, but 46 of those are people who are, if for lack of another word, the audience, the members of the public. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, Francis.
Yes, thank you. All right, so what I'm going to do now is go into a bit more detail in terms of the budget and taxation. That seems to be the primary interest for folks that are attending tonight. So you've seen this information in a nutshell, and if you are only interested in the very high level impact of the budget proposals at this point, this information is what you'll want to see. So in 2021, the entire assessment base for Area C was 728 million. It's increased to 752 million. So an increase of 24 million over the course of the last year, which represents a 3.31% increase in assessed values. So that's a combination of both property values increasing and new construction. And then I'll move on to the parcel tax. That will be of interest to those of you that are in the Christina Lake water system. So parcel tax in 2020, 391, 2021 proposed 391. With the various budget proposals that we've got for the 24 services that Christina Lake participates in 2020, for a $200,000 property, your tax bill would have been $980. With the proposed budgets that we've got in place at this point in time, we're looking at an increase to $1,011. So a $30 increase for 2021 over 2020, which represents a 3.12% increase. So that's the real high level general introduction to this. Those of you who've participated in these sessions in the past will remember that you've got a thick booklet of a handout of the budgets for each of our services. And I believe a number of you, most of you would have been emailed that shortly before the meeting today as part of your invitation to the Zoom webinar session.
Yeah, and just to jump in there, Mark, if anybody, there was a reminder that went out to everybody 1 hour before the meeting, any registrants at all. At the very bottom of that email is a note and a link to the PDF document. If you click that link, you can directly download the PDF. You can also do that from a Join the Conversation project site.
Thank you, Francis. Yeah. And that's what I've got on the screen at this point. It's a 38-page document, and this first summary page lists all the 24 services that Christina Lake participates in.
Mark, can I interrupt for a second?
Please go ahead.
Someone is very interested in knowing what a parcel tax is, and I understand that. Also, there is a second parcel tax at Christina Lake, which belongs to Park and Rec.
Yeah.
So there's 2 parcel taxes, but maybe they need to understand if they haven't been faced before what a parcel tax is.
Sure. Parcel tax is a flat fee per parcel that's applied for various types of services. So as opposed to an assessment-based tax where your taxation is relative to the value of your property, each parcel is assessed a tax that is flat. It's a flat rate, one rate per parcel. So whether it's a $2 million home on a parcel or a $10,000 home, they would receive the same tax bill for that service. Okay. All right, just to help you navigate through this summary sheet, and the following pages all outline the individual budget summaries for each of these services, but this one is a really good snapshot in terms of where the aggregated budgets sit as compared to 2020. So on the left-hand side is a list of the 24 services. The columns 1 through 3, you'll see on the middle left, show the 2020 budget numbers. So they'll show the total annual budget, the total RDKB tax requisition, the amount we taxed for that service across the regional district. And then in column 3, the Area C component of that taxation, or Area C's share of that. Then in columns 4, 5, and 6, we're showing the proposed annual budget number, the proposed total RDKB tax requisition, and then the proposed Christina Lake share of that entire tax requisition in column 6. The most significant columns you might find are column 4 minus 1, this one, and column 6 minus 3, which represent the total annual budget change and the change as it applies to Area C in the budget. So this final column on the right may be the most significant to you because it shows the change in the budget as it applies to electoral Area C. And you can see there are a number of increases, a couple of decreases there, but some of the more significant increases, and I'll just expand that so everyone has a bit better view of that one column. So some of the more significant increases are 62,000 for fire protection, Christina Lake, 26,000. sorry, the 62,000 was economic development, 26,000 for fire protection, and 27,000 for regional parks and trails. So the 62,000 associated with regional economic development, that's largely associated with that service not carrying over surplus into 2021. There was a significant surplus carried over last year, which helped us to reduce the taxes considerably moving into 2020. We don't have that surplus moving into 2021. Fire protection, there's some increases there associated with capital improvements with the SCBA compressor, and also moving to changing the way we compensate our paid on call firefighters. Traditionally, we've provided those firefighters with an honorarium, and looking at providing paid on call pay to those firefighters so that they're paid a rate for their individual callouts, which is the industry standard these days. Parks and trails up 27,000, and a lot of that has to do with contributions to reserve. We've got a number of grant applications that we've either applied for or are looking at, and in order to be eligible for those grants, we have to have our share of the capital costs for those projects available to contribute to the program. And then the other big increase is building inspection. And you'll see the overall budget actually decreased for the building inspection service, but Christina Lake's contribution to that service is proposed to increase at by 34,000. And that's a unique part of the building inspection service. There's a formula. There are, for that service, 11 participants in that service, the 5 electoral areas of the regional district plus 6 municipalities. And the amount that each jurisdiction pays into that service is tied in part to the level of building activities 2 years previous. So in 2019, Christina Lake had a number of building projects that had significant value relative to the rest of the regional district. And as a result, for this year, is paying a higher component than they did last year. And that's where that sits. Then the bottom of this page also, once again, showing, as I pointed out in the nutshell earlier on, the impact of all 24 services as a summary, and for a bottom line then for a $200,000 property where your tax bill would have been $980 last year, would be increasing to $1,011, so a $30 increase for a $200,000 property, representing 3.12%.
And we do have one question that may be well answered later, but I just thought I'd bring it up. Jeff is asking about, no doubt COVID's cost us a fair bit. Do you know the approximate cost of your RDKB thus far, as well as where the money would come from to cover these costs? And will we see in 2021 or years to come a decrease in funding to some areas, not-for-profits, et cetera? I'm assuming because of the effect of COVID. Will taxes be raised to pay back some of that? So there's some pieces there that may fit into what you're speaking of, and some that might best come later as a question for Mark Stevens, but I'll leave that with you for the moment.
Yeah, I can speak to that one very quickly. We've actually done from our financial position, we've done very well over the course of the COVID pandemic, as compared to other local governments that we've heard from. Many of our services have either incurred new expenses or losses in revenue streams. So, for example, the Aquatic Center or the arena in Grand Forks, where we've had to limit the hours or shut down the facilities for a period of time due to COVID, that's represented for us a reduction in the revenue stream there. But on the other side, we've also had a number of savings in terms of expenses as a result of those. And then on top of all that, we've received what has been labeled a COVID restart grant from the province. Every local government in the province has received a grant to help compensate local governments for those additional costs. And we specifically have received a grant of $489,000 that we can put toward those revenue losses and additional expenses incurred as a result of the COVID pandemic. So our bottom line impact from COVID has been relatively small compared to other local governments, which is a good thing for taxpayers across the region.
And another question related to that, to do with costs, and I'll just throw it out there in case it fits here, is Dennis is asking about animal control and the fact that it's cost around $54,000, and what are we getting for that? And there's still some bigger problems he mentions.
Okay.
A lot. We're getting a lot for that. Okay, if I can jump in here, that has been one of the best services we ever combined with City of Grand Forks and Greenwood and Area D, and it has been worth every cent we put into it. And quite frankly, people finally get some results. I have had very, very few complaints about the animal control people. So maybe that'll help.
Thank you, Grace.
And those are the only specific ones I can see related to the budget directly right now. Maureen, did you note any others that nope? So there's a bunch of other questions, but we're going to get to them one by one with the different parts of the presentation. And if not, then at the end, we'll spend some time on the remaining questions. Okay, thanks.
Okay. Well, if there are no other questions on the budget, why don't we move on to the other services that we're going to highlight where there are specific issues or pieces of information that we want to share. So I'll stop sharing the budget screen and go back to the presentation.
And I'll just mention in the interim, the other regional district Kootenay boundary managers and staff people here, if you've seen questions that you can answer directly in the Q&A, by all means, we can address those at the end as well, but feel free to provide some answers. And I see some people are doing that. So that's really helpful. Thank you.
All right. So the first area that we wanted to focus on is noxious weed control, specifically Christina Lake, the milfoil service. And I'll turn it over to Janine because we've got some 2020 season highlights here. And I think Janine can more accurately speak to these than I.
Thank you, Mark. I don't know if you want to adjust the display setting to be the full screen for folks. But regardless, I will start. If you want to just go back to the first picture, Mark, on the front there, if you wouldn't mind. For people that have an ability to see our staff on the boat up close, they're actually wearing masks. So the picture there does speak to some of the challenges that we had during the 2020 season, which obviously is COVID that has impacted everybody. So certainly that picture expresses some of what they had to go through. I'll speak to that a little bit further. If you want to go to the next slide, Mark, the 2020 season highlights, that would be great. So 2020 was our 34th consecutive year using scuba divers in Christina Lake. Before COVID hit and before the divers jumped into the water, we were able to complete 2 of our planned capital projects for the year. One being replacement of breathing regulators for the divers that they had issues with in 2019. I think you can all imagine having a breathing regulator that is not working properly does not bode well for the divers. So we had to get those replaced. And where we actually got them replaced was the same location that we had bought them from previously, and they gave us a really good rebate because of the faulty nature of them. So we were actually able to come in on that project about half the budget that we were planning on expending. So that was good. We also replaced the old boat motors that were on the boat. Those motors had come from the previous boat that was in use for quite a number of years, and the hours on those motors were getting quite high. So we replaced them with a couple 150 horsepower commercial grade engines. So that will hopefully have some very, very good longevity going forward for that boat. And they're a little bit better powered for the size of the new boat. COVID-19 impacts. Yes, that definitely had some impacts for us and our crew. Few things that had to happen, obviously, is everybody had to wear masks while on the boat and in and around themselves and getting to the site. They also had to institute safety measures with cleaning everything down, cleaning their regulators, all of their dive equipment. Plus, we were not able to have the entire complement of dive crew. We started the year off with the intention of having 7. When COVID hit, and through the new protocols that we had to put in place and the limitations on the number of divers allowed on the boat because of the size and spacing, we decided to go down to 6 and not bring everybody back. And that was the plan. We had a good plan for 6 divers. And then right at the last minute, we had an additional diver that dropped out from the program. And so we ended up running the program this year with only a dive crew of 5. But they did the best they could. And we started the season on May 4th. And because of the shortage of dive crew, we extended the season right till the end of October, which according to Phil, the dive supervisor, was fairly chilly, but they persevered and did certainly the best they could given the limitations. For the most part, the crew operated with 4 divers at a time, again, because more associated with the ability to, or the limited ability to have all 5 on the boat, even though it's a very large boat. Spacing limitations didn't allow for all 5 to be on there and be in compliance with COVID protocols. So when they were operating in and around the South Shore, where they could have divers access the lake more from the docks, they were able to have all 5 crew members on staff on those days. But it was sort of not quite the program that we had originally planned due to COVID. Ultimately, there was 603 identified sites, and they did 2 full laps of the lake. They also, again, did some work in Christina Creek, August 19th, 27th, and September 14th as well. And in total, we had about 450,000 plants removed. This was obviously a bit of a drop from 2019, 535,000. But certainly, like I said, given the circumstances involved, they did their best. What has been updated, and I talked a little bit about this last year, is the regional district has developed a story map for this program, and it's actually on our Join the Conversation page. And in there, what we've done is we've mapped out all 603 sites, and we actually show trends of the number of plants picked over the last number of years of the program. There's little dots that come up, and as you scroll through, you can actually see the number of plants picked as well as the densities in those areas and how they've changed. What's been added to the program this year through this story map is if you go into those maps, you'll see little dots that come up that are for specific sites. And if you click on that dot, you can actually go to see all of the details in behind that specific site, including pictures. So we've asked the dive crew when they're out and about to take some pictures, and they've now got actually photos, underwater photos showing the density of the plants, and hopefully we can see that over time. So we're hoping that this is a very good way of not just creating an annual report, we've got that too, but for people to really kind of engage with that site and really, for those that want to delve into the numbers and the details, they're all there. So it's certainly a way that we're hoping that we can effectively provide the information to this program, because it is very expensive, right? We understand that there's a lot of money for these divers, and so we want to make sure that we're providing you folks the information we can. Next slide, Mark, please. So 2021 program, what is it going to look like? Well, hopefully similar to previous years, not necessarily 2020, because we're not quite sure what the COVID-19 impacts are going to be, but we are anticipating there are going to be some obviously remaining impacts to potential dive crew numbers and that sort of thing. We are, however, going to try and recruit divers in advance of the season to ensure that what challenges we had in 2020 with one of the divers leaving unexpectedly and not returning to the program, that we can account for that and ideally have a crew of 6 minimum. The current proposed budget that I have for 2021 includes the dive crew of 7, because obviously if COVID-19 protocols change and we can achieve that, we certainly want to do it. So that's what we're hoping to do. The other thing that I've been watching and kind of keeping an eye on it, as well as Grace has been very much actively looking at what other alternatives are there. We certainly know the divers are doing their best that they can, and they are doing a great job and have been, but obviously they are quite expensive. And so there's a couple of things that have sort of hit the top of my radar list as far as alternate technologies. I know weevils and stuff like that have been looked at in the past. But there's these two things that I want to look at a little bit this year. One's called a floating benthic mat. It's similar to what was done historically with those geomembrane mats that were placed on the bottom of the lake, and they inhibited light, which obviously stopped growth of everything. The problem with those is that they sat on the bottom of the lake and basically they sat there forever, sediment filled on top of them, and milfoil is absolutely amazing at basically growing anywhere. So it really was not effective from a long-term solution. So these floating benthic mats are a little bit different. They float about 6 inches off the bottom of the lake. They're put in by divers at the beginning of the season before growth takes effect, and then they're pulled out after anywhere from 10 to 12 weeks, and does sort of similar sort of things. So I'm looking into that. It was brought to my attention by the Okanagan Nation Alliance that did a project actually in the Columbia River. And so I'm hopefully going to be having some conversations with them to see what benefits they were and whether or not there's some partnership availabilities that we could have as well. The other one is a nano bubble diffuser system. And basically what this is a very fancy air bubble aeration system that is being talked about. And I believe, and Grace, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's Shawnigan Lake that was attempting to use this for milfoil control. It's not something that has been done previously, to the best of my knowledge, to a great degree. But they were going to do we're trying to do some piloting of this type of technology. And so we're going to contact them and see if they had any success to see whether or not it could be applicable for Christina Lake. So more information to come, and we'll see kind of where that goes. Either way, there's going to be a process if we want to try any of these things, to find the money to get it, which we're trying to put money into reserves right now for this service to be able to provide some funding for a pilot of hopefully one of these alternative technologies. The other thing that we're going to have to do is go through the proper permitting process with the ministry to make sure that we have all the appropriate permits in place to be able to do this appropriately in the lake. So with that, that's about the end of my presentation. There is certainly more information on the Join the Conversation website, so highly recommend you guys go there. And that's where there's also a link to the story map that I discussed earlier. Thank you.
And Janine, we've got a number of questions that have come in
Sure.
actually while you've been chatting.
Okay.
And I'm going to start with one of the basic ones here, which is essentially what does benthic mean, and where does milfoil come from?
Two very good questions. So benthic is just it's in the lower part of the lake. It's like the low. Google it if you really need to, but basically they're a benthic mat. So it's the lower part of the lake. It's basically the bottom of the lake is where these things go, and that's why it's called a floating mat. It's typically a geomembrane type component or like a fabric-based material. I've also seen some other benthic mats that are placed, and some concepts that are a coconut-based system that is a biodegradable type benthic mat that you place on the bottom of the lake. So that's the benthic. Where does milfoil come from? Darn good question. It's a very invasive aquatic species that unfortunately it has a very good ability to get a foothold in lakes, and it's normally transported through boats. When a boat in an infested lake gets moved and transported into a non-infested lake, fragments of that milfoil can be transported when you unload your boat, and that can then subsequently start an infestation. I don't think, and Grace, maybe you can correct me on this, I don't know if anyone has ever figured out how milfoil ever got into Christina Lake. Is there any?
Well, it got into any of the lakes because it's Eurasian. It's the Eurasian milfoil. So it was introduced from Europe. I would also add, as far as the benthic question, that's a zone in a body of water, meaning it's the bottom part of the lake. That's why it's called that kind of mat. Anyway, yeah, it was introduced many years ago. from Europe, and it traveled from lake to lake through boats, of course.
And so maybe I'll jump in there. There's a question about the increase of high-powered wake surf boats. And we're seeing an increase of milfoil floating around. This is from Monica. Any ideas on addressing that?
That's very interesting. That's a great comment. I appreciate that, because that's certainly something that can move those materials around. And those fragments, then when they float around and they settle, they can actually reestablish. So yeah, so thank you for bringing that up. I don't have a solution for that right now.
Well, I can speak to that if you want.
Sure, that would be great.
We've talked about over and over again. People's boats need to stay in the middle of the lake. They need to quit going to the outer part of the lake. I've shared that with the RCMP, the stewardship, everyone, and we've tried to promote, stay to the middle of the lake with your boats, for heaven's sakes, and don't go down the creek either. Do people always listen? No. Are the boats more powerful with larger wakes? Yes. Does it create more problems? Absolutely. So I've asked the RCMP anytime they have an opportunity when they're out in the lake to point that out to boaters.
Okay, and a follow-up question, just to get through some of the weed ones here, is will noxious, this is from Arlene, will noxious weed control include eradication of the fragrant water lily at the south end of the lake? It's choked off Christina Creek and spread into the lake between Sutherland and Christina.
Yeah, well, Janine can speak to that, but that's not, doesn't come under the milfoil. It comes under a different branch of government. So it's very complicated. Janine, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, just the milfoil program is funded through taxation specifically to milfoil. Like the monies there can't be used to treat other invasive plants such as the fragrant water lily. Certainly, we've been having conversations with the ministry on that particular plant, and we actually specifically in, I think it was 2018 or 2019, did a bit of an exercise with funding from the ministry using our dive crew that went in and actually tried to pick the fragrant water lily to try and get an understanding of how much it would cost and what kind of program that would look like. Again, very expensive to be doing. And those ultimately there needs to be a budget and a service created for it. But the bigger issue is then working with the ministry to try and address how is that removed and what is the impact to other native species in those crowd control activities. Whatever we pick or whatever the best management practices for that, we also have to be cognizant of the native species and the impacts to other aquatic life. So it's definitely challenging. The ministry is aware of it, but I certainly understand the frustrations.
And then another question, there's just a couple more here on milfoil, is regarding, this is from Laura, regarding diving through milfoil control, do you have additional funds this year to increase man hours? As reported, the report showed there was less done this year due to COVID. Will there be, and also the second part of that question is, will there be road checks this summer for boats on trailers?
Yeah, those are probably two separate questions, just with related to actually separate programs. So the first one, the monies in the budget are allowing for a dive crew of up to 7 divers if we can manage that in still adhering to COVID-19 protocols. What we're hoping to do is have at least 6, which will then hopefully allow for additional picking to happen. We do have the option as well, if we get 6 divers, to again try and extend the season to try and get as much from that crew picked as possible. So certainly that is the plan for 2021. The boat checks that you're referring to, that's, I believe, a zebra quagga mussel boat checks. So it's a totally different program, totally different organizations, but to the best of my knowledge, that is going to be in place again for 2021. It's an extremely high priority. Both in the province of BC as a whole, and obviously the impacts to Christina Lake would be absolutely significant if those species ever get into Christina Lake. So certainly high priority, clean, drain, dry, please.
Yeah, well, I'll add to that because last year there were not very many checks out where they needed to be. And I, for one, have the same concern on that. So I hope the province is going to put those checks back where they belong. But last year, we hardly ever saw them.
So were they not doing checks at the lake? Please.
Yeah, I think at the boat launch,
Grace.
I think at some of them at the boat launch were, but what I'm talking about is there used to be a check on top of the Paulson. There was one outside of Midway. Anyway, just my comment.
Yep, for sure.
And just to let people know who there's different questions coming in, is we'll have all these questions afterwards, and I'm going to feed these over to environmental services, the appropriate staff, so they can include it in the information about the milfoil program and that kind of thing. And another question that came up is from Dennis. Is there any funding from non-Area C residents who use the lake for recreation and fishing to contribute to this program?
None, never has been, even though I push those buttons. Even when Grand Forks asks for us to share costs in something, I tell them, you pay for my pool, I might talk about paying for yours. But until that happens, guess what? Christina Lake isn't going to. That's the simple answer. And that's, you can tell how that annoys me that everybody else in the regional district uses Christina Lake and not one other community helps us.
And two other just questions to finish, which are more kind of curiosity type questions from Lori. One is, why did the 6th diver leave the program? And the other one is, did scuba divers do anything other than milfoil?
Yeah, as far as I know, the 6th diver left actually because he had other employment elsewhere that was paying him way more than we were. And that's going to be a bit of a challenge for us. Obviously, we try to be competitive in our rates that we pay our divers, but we are very respectful as well that the taxpayer is paying for this 100%. We're hoping to attract divers that would like to spend their summer on Christina Lake, and it has sort of added benefits more than just a dollar value, but that doesn't necessarily apply to all divers that may have different priorities in their life. As far as the second question, sorry, Francis, what was the second question again?
Do the scuba divers do any other kind of work for the environmental services programs or RDKB services other than the milfoil?
Yeah, not specifically for other environmental services, but I believe one of the divers is part of the fire crew. So certainly they are active in the communities as well as best they can. And yeah.
And then a last question I'll include here, just because it came in and covers something different, is, one second here, I just lost it. Can the rototilling be used that was used like it was used in the Okanagan for the milfoil program? So a comment on that.
Yeah, they're in the Okanagan Basin Water Board. They do harvesting as well as rototilling of milfoil. The two very different programs. The harvesting was sort of more the historic idea where the big machines go in and they actually clip and harvest. The milfoil floats to the top of the lake and then the wind blows it to the shores and then they collect it all and compost it. That's something that is kind of not as desirable anymore because of the large stink, shall we say, that it caused when the milfoil went up on shore and started to decompose. Rototilling is something that's been more, is seen as greater. The issue potentially, but it's certainly much more, we talk invasive plants, it's more invasive technology in that it actually rototills the bottom of the lake. And so again, it has to be used very selectively. And typically rototilling machines are used in very large water bodies. But again, that's something also that I can take a look into and see the applicability for Christina Lake.
No.
I don't think it'll be overly effective for Christina Lake and would probably be more detrimental.
It will not, Janine. You
Okay.
probably weren't here. They did try it once before, but if you want all the water lines in the lake ripped out,
Yeah.
that's a good way to do it.
Yeah.
So it's not something that we can do. And there was a piece that was tried years and years and years ago. And what a mess it created.
Yeah.
So with that, there's a couple of other questions, but I'm going to leave it there because they're related to questions that we've answered and move on to the next portion of the presentation. We're now at 7 o'clock, so we have until 8 o'clock. We have an hour left. We've got a few different things to cover, and we want to make sure that everybody gets a chance to ask their questions. So and Mark, are you able to get that to the full screen with your display?
No, I can't.
No.
I've got display settings, but that would take us out of presentation mode.
Okay, any suggestion from that you have from IT folks, from Dale, that how we might address that? Or from Freya?
Mark, I noticed, did you right click there on the screen? And I noticed a menu item that said hide presenter view. I don't know if that's.
Let me see. I think maybe if I click on the other screen.
Christina Anderson was just suggesting if you stop sharing and try presenting on another screen, we might, so if you stop the sharing and start the sharing again on another screen, that might allow you to do the full screen presentation.
Okay.
Or go hide presenter view right above where your cursor is. I'm wondering that one.
That's the one I was thinking about.
And by everybody, we just get the technical piece just so everybody can have the best view possible.
Oh, it just made it go away. Right.
Uh-oh.
Oh, he's just going to show it again. We're good.
But it, yeah.
So we're now up to, we were as high as 46 attendees. We're down to 43. A few people have had the questions answered. We sort of done a little bit of a up and down. So, and I mentioned we've got a number of other questions that I'll touch on as soon as we're back in the presentation here. And of course, this is a good time if you're attending to take a quick trip to the washroom if you need to.
Well, I might, if I can jump in, I saw a question about the fish community plan, and that's something that I can jump in and say it is continuing. We were on hold for a while because of COVID. It's taking us a lot longer than we intended to get through the fish community plan, and the community will be hearing more from us. We are not done talking with the community yet. So hopefully that will answer that question. There's a lot of bylaws have to be looked at. There's still a whole pile of information we want to walk through with the community of Christina Lake. So I hope that answered that question.
Okay, and we'll look at a couple of other questions here that I think different people on the call can answer.
And I can add to that about the official community plan. So a lot of the sections, the more general sections like the community profile and environmentally sensitive areas and agricultural and resource uses, those have already been looked at. And now our senior planner, Elizabeth Moore, she's looking at the land use designation. So she's diving into those, and meetings being held in February. And the hope is that there'll be a draft by the fall that will be shared with the public, and hopefully we'll be able to meet in person to share that.
And another question that just jumped to mind here, Grace, I'm not sure if you can answer this one, but it's what exactly is the economic development budget spent on?
A whole pile of things, actually. If they look at Gateway, and actually Donna's on, she could speak to that whole thing. And anytime they want a whole rundown on that, all they have to do is contact Donna Wilczynski. It covers help for small business. It covers just about everything. The Welcome Center, a little bit of everything. Help to anybody that wants to come to the area. And we can give them all that information as well as meet with them. And Donna's involved with so many things. She's involved with the Kootenai Boundary Lending Institute, I forget what it's called. And several people have gotten loans through that. She does grants. She does just about everything. So hopefully that helps. If not, Donna will be happy to give you a rundown of everything that we do there.
Okay, so with that, it looks like we've got the presentation back up, and I'll turn it over to maybe a quick explanation of the difference between looking for?
I can speak to this one,
Yeah.
Francis. So we have a budget issue looming in the next couple of years, a capital expense issue with the fire service. So through 2022 and 2023, we've got to replace a couple of trucks. I'll speak to the budget issue. If anyone has any questions that come up about the mechanics of a truck, I'll turn that one over to Chief Geary for that one. But at this point, our budget is designed around long-term borrowing for the purchase of those trucks. So looking at a 15-year term, which amounts to 116 annually, $116,000 annually over a 15-year period. The issue that I want to raise with that is in order to undertake long-term borrowing, we have to go to the assent of the electors. And what that means, we have to ask your permission to do long-term borrowing, anything over 5 years. And the reason we're doing that is to try to keep your annual taxes down to a manageable level. There is an alternative. We can go to short-term borrowing, and we could do that without having to go to the assent of electors. But the cost associated with that would be $240,000 per year to cover the costs of those additional fire trucks that we need. And we need them because the fire apparatus are governed by the fire underwriters. In order to maintain our community insurance rating and to keep your insurance premiums for fire insurance down to a level that is acceptable to people, we have to replace our trucks as per the fire underwriter's schedule. So in 2022, 2023, we're looking at 2 new purchases. And through the course of 2021, we'll be coming to you, asking you as the residents of Christina Lake, are you willing, or would you like the regional district to enter into a long-term borrowing arrangement to finance those trucks? And the reason we're doing that is to keep your taxes down on an annual basis. There's an alternative, but it would result in an increase in your taxes on an annual basis. So that, just want to give you a heads up about that. And I don't know if there's any questions around the need for the 2 trucks. Happy to answer those or defer to either Chief Geary or James Chandler, our GM of operations, if there's anything specific that anyone wants to know about fire trucks.
There's a couple questions. One is, what's a fire underwriter? That's from Lori, and we'll start with that and then move on to the other ones.
They work for the insurance industry. It's an organization called the Fire Underwriters Survey, and work for the insurance industry to set the standards that form the basis of your insurance premiums and insurance policies. So if a community, for example, has all their trucks that are 30 years in age or older, you won't get the benefit of a reduced fire premium because the fire underwriters have set a standard that the trucks need to be replaced before they reach that stage.
Okay, and the other question is, what's the longevity of the new trucks? So let's say we get the new trucks, how long are they going to last?
Chief Geary, I'll turn that one over to the chief.
Yeah, so the underwriters and NFPA say 20 years on to replace a truck. You can get extensions on them as long as you have a second piece that's within that 20 years. So, so for our tender, we'll always own just one tender. So you have to replace that every 20 years. With an engine, because we have a second engine, you can get extensions through the fire underwriters to 25. And then you can put in for another request up to 30. So right now our tender is 25 years old and our number 2 engine is 29.
Okay, and the other question is this going to go to referendum?
There are a couple of options, and the preferred option that it looks like we'll be able to undertake is the alternative approval process. So what we would be doing is a public engagement process, putting the question out there do you as electors object to the regional district undertaking long-term borrowing? If more than 10% of the electors object to us undertaking long-term borrowing, then we would be required to go to a referendum to get the approval of the electors. So the first step is the alternative approval process. Assuming there are less than 10% of the electors who are opposed to that, then we could go ahead and undertake the long-term borrowing. If more than 10% object, we've got to start a referendum process.
And if I can jump in here, Mark, you know, there's a couple of things that are really important. Number one, we don't have a choice here. If we had a choice, we'd do something different. If we want to continue to operate as the fire service that we're operating under and provide those discounts to insurance, et cetera, and qualify, we have no choice but to upgrade our trucks. Every fire department is faced with that, not just us. So it boils down to, you know, if you want us to go to referendum costs money. Still, you've got the choice. If you don't want the fire department to continue the way it is, your answer might be no. But guess what? Then everybody pays a price for that. If you agree to long-term borrowing, you have not the increase that you would if we have to go out and buy a truck in order to continue. So to me, it's a really easy conversation there. Do you want to do long-term borrowing? And borrowing money for the regional district is a way cheaper than borrowing money for any of you out there in the community, even though that's really cheap right now. But regional districts have a very high credit rating there. So that's our opportunity. And of course, as far as I'm concerned, it stands to reason. I wouldn't want to see that raise in taxation to buy a truck. I'd rather borrow some money.
And because we've had a question also about the cost of long-term borrowing, and I see that Barb Island has answered that. Barb, did you want to just explain that question and answer to everybody on the call here in the virtual meeting here?
Sure, I will. So the question was, does it cost the regional district and the taxpayer, of course, more for long-term borrowing, or does it average out to be the same? And the answer is, it will cost more because we're borrowing the money over a longer period of time. In a nutshell. It does end up costing more, but it is saving the taxpayer on an annual basis, not having their taxes go up exponentially for a short period of time.
Well, anytime you borrow money, it ends up costing you more because you're going to pay some interest on it. That's just a given. But does it cost more in taxation? It's going to cost less in taxation than it would if you're paying for a truck.
So on that note, there's a comment that 15 from Raymond that 15 years borrowing costs is greater than 500,000 for more than a 5-year term. This is substantial. And the follow-up question, which is from somebody else, but I think that links to that previous comment, is can the trucks be refurbished? And maybe that's a question best answered by Chief Geary.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can get them refurbished, but they have to strip them right down, rebuild them from scratch, replace all the pumps. That can get very costly too. I would have to look into the underwriters. They do have a section for that, but I'm not too sure if we'd be able to do it with the #2 engine because it's already 30 years old, because they do look at the frame, because the frame can't be a certain age as well. So.
Okay, and then we have one follow-up from Lori to do with the possibility of a referendum. So if the assent process garners enough no's, then it would trigger a referendum. And his comment is, this is something the Regional District of Kootenay Boundary obviously does not want, question mark?
It's not about whether the regional district wants it. It's about how the community wants to pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, and I'm just gonna, Mark, you can correct me if I'm wrong, there are these processes in place for exactly this, so that the residents have a chance to make a choice and understand. And part of that is us communicating the information so that people have the information they need to make an informed choice.
Yeah, and just as an example, a couple of years ago, we went through a similar process with the Area D, the Rural Grand Forks Fire Service, where we went through the alternative approval process to allow for capital investment in a new truck, 2 new trucks, and refurbishment renovations to a fire hall. And in that case, we received 2 objections from the entire electoral area, Area D. It's a simpler process, so it's a good way of gauging people's feelings on the issue. And if there's general assent that this is the best way to go, it is a much simpler way to go than organizing a referendum and asking everybody to come out and vote on a given day. So it's just a step process, whereas if this works and is a simple answer from the community, if the community doesn't feel it's an issue, then we aren't requiring them to go through the full referendum process.
Okay, and then another question that's probably best suited for Chief Geary, which is what happens to the old fire engines?
So we would, with the old apparatus, we would sell them, put them up for auction, and then it would probably end up going to an industrial fire department or somewhere on a farm.
Okay, so they'll be sold, and somebody who has a suitable use for them will likely buy them. And then another question that just came in is, if we borrow for a 15-year term, will we not need another truck the day we pay off the truck bought this time?
Certainly not the day. It's a 20-year lifespan that can be extendable, depending on whether it's the engine or the tender.
So we could see up to a decade more use. Yeah, and those are the end of the final questions right now. So we could move on to the next.
All right, I can speak to this one as well. Boundary Transit. Last year, we had polled the community to determine whether there was an interest in extending the Boundary Transit service to Christina Lake. And just as background for everybody, we operate a Boundary Transit service with the City of Grand Forks, Electoral Area D, the City of Greenwood, and a portion of Electoral Area E as the participants. So those are the areas that receive transit service. So we're looking at again, whether Christina Lake area would be interested in having that service extended to include Christina Lake. Over the course of the past year, there's been a number of advancements in that service. As you may recall, for those who attended the session last year, we were in a bit of a bind in that the operator of the service that works under a contract with BC Transit, which was the Interior Health Authority last year, had expressed a desire to get out of operating that service. So we weren't very certain as to whether BC Transit would be able to find an operator. As of August of 2020, they have a new operator, and things are going well. So we're in a position now where we can relaunch public engagement with Christina Lake residents to determine whether you're interested in looking at expanding the service to Christina Lake. That would involve an amendment to our annual operating agreement, our cost share agreement with BC Transit. It's an expansion of the service area, and would also mean we would have to amend the service area establishment bylaw for that service to include Christina Lake. So there's a number of procedural steps, but before we begin any of those steps, we want to gauge the level of interest from Christina Lake residents as to whether you would like transit service at Christina Lake. And through that process, we'll be giving you some sense of the ballpark costs associated with that for the taxpayer, so you can make an informed decision or input as to what you would like to see in the future. I'll I'll turn it over to Grace. Grace, I suspect you may have a comment.
Yeah, I do. Thank you, Mark. Just to let everybody know, at one point we were in the transit service many, many years ago. It turned out that there were 3 people using it, and we paid one heck of a lot of money into it because of our assessment base. So at that point, we pulled out of that service. So I too am very interested in seeing what is going to be put together for the new transit service and what that'll look like and what that might cost us if we want to buy back into that service. So, you know, we wish we had the numbers already for everybody, but we don't. And that's not our fault. It's just the way things went. And of course, you know, we got slowed down once again with COVID. So James has been working really hard on this, and I don't know if he wants to comment on it as well. But as soon as he has the numbers, we'll all have the numbers and we will share them with you.
James, is there more detail that you'd like to provide?
Thanks, no, to both you and Grace there. I think that's a great overview. I think more to answer any questions. The biggest thing is that we do have that operator now in place, so we can work through real numbers and come back to you potentially with options for what that would look like. One reason why really that will take some time is because we partner with BC Transit. So any numbers for service level increase that we would like to see, they also have to agree that they can meet their share of the costs, which for them isn't a quick decision. They won't just get back to us and say, yeah, we can do that in a next year, no problem. There's an assessment kind of process that they go through. So we don't want to come forwards with suggestions to find that it is something then that BC Transit can't support. So as CEO Anderson said, it's a step-by-step process, but we will be bringing things back to you.
Okay, and we have just one question here from Lily, and it may or may not be something you can answer at this meeting, is why did the first operator want to leave the contract?
I could add.
Go ahead, James.
I think as much as we learned, it was operated by the Interior Health Authority, and they ultimately decided that operating transit wasn't their business. So they provided notice to get out of it. And I would speak to the benefit that we actually, overall as a regional district, that we've seen from that. They took the money that I guess they had in their budgets to fund their part of transit. And we've seen additional money come to us through a Health Connections, effectively a grant from Interior Health through BC Transit, that they're supporting additional transit runs for providing people connections to essentially to get to hospital or appointments. So they've backed out of it from one way and put money back into it in another, which overall is a benefit for us at this time, especially now we have another operator running the service.
Okay, and we do have actually a couple of polling questions related to the topic of both the new fire trucks and also the transit issue. So I'm going to put these up now. 2 separate questions, and they're both related to engagement. And let me just put that up. I believe this is the first one. And the last one that says other tell us through the Q&A, it means I want you to tell us through the Q&A. I won't tell you, you tell us what you want through the Q&A. Still a few responses coming in. Okay, and I'm going to end it there. So 59% want to see some kind of a survey or tools on join the conversation. Others, maybe a combination of that with a virtual meeting. 3% want us to wait, and waiting, I understand from Mark and from James, may not be an option depending how long this pandemic goes on, and the same for the process related to the assent vote. So I have one more polling question for you here. I'm going to stop this and go on to the next one. And this one relates to the transit. So it's a two-part question. And this is just going to take a few minutes because people have to think a little bit more about what they want to respond. And you do need to submit an answer to both for it to show up. So for this poll to be completed and be able to show the information. Okay, a few more answers still coming in. And I'm going to stop it there because we've got the same number of people generally who've been showing. So I'm going to share the results, and here we go. So for considering the information you heard about boundary transit, how do you want to receive more information? And we've got a newsletter, e-blast, and join the conversation online and by mail. Some people still want to see some mail, some kind of a mail out, and another virtual meeting would work. How likely are you to accept having to pay for new transit service? Well, that's an interesting spread here. We've got fairly even between these 1, 2, 3, and 4. So a lot of people don't have an opinion either way. And you can see what the results are there. So that's interesting, and we'll take that away to mull it over. Okay. And we can move on from there. So we're at the end of the kind of formal presentation portion of the evening. And I just put up a couple of other topics that I know may be of interest to you. And we have a few questions that maybe I'll go through that relate to these different topics that haven't been answered. And then I have one final very brief poll for you, depending how many questions we get coming in here on other topics. So I'm getting a note here, whoops, excuse me. I'm getting a note here that we have a question from Dale. We have a question for Joe. 1 second here, just give me a moment. Okay. Let me just scroll through here.
I can ask the question if you like.
Thanks, Barb.
It's in the chat. It's just wanted to confirm with Chief Geary that the Christina Lake fire rescue tanker is now 25 years old and that its second fire engine is now 29 years old. So confirmation on that, Chief.
Thank you, Barb.
Hi, Laura. Yes, that is correct. The tender's 25 and the engine's 29.
And I believe he wanted the results of that last poll as well. He didn't get them, and neither did I, quite frankly, Francis.
Okay, I can probably share those results again if you like.
Please.
Can everybody see that?
I can't see the very bottom of them.
I have to scroll
Yeah,
down.
I got it. I got it. It's okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, and those will be, this presentation is being recorded. It'll also be available on the Join the Conversation site once we post this information up. And I'm just looking through some of the other questions here, and if any of the other managers want to jump in to comment on anything here. There's a few comments in regards to transit. Dennis isn't sure that he's not in favor of it being a taxation program, as there's no way to ensure it can serve all of the Area C community. So that comment will be captured. A follow-up question about milfoil that would, from Arlene is, are we getting value for money for milfoil removal? From reading the Okanagan Basin Water Board financial report, it appears the Okanagan Lake chain spends just under $700,000 for the 5-lake chain on this issue, and it spreads over a much larger rate base than it does for the RDKB. Would it be more efficient financially to spend less on milfoil and redirect efforts to fragrant water lily?
No, it wouldn't, because at one point the whole lake was really, really, really infected. We've come a long way. And there was a certain point in time where we were wondering. That's why we ended up with 2 different dive crews at one point to try and bring it back down. The other people have several regional districts that pay into their milfoil budget. And therein lies the difference between Christina Lake and Okanagan Lakes or whatever, is they have several regional districts they all pay in. And of course they till it. So it's completely, it's apples and oranges. And the thing is, if we only concentrate on the lily, we're concentrating on Christina Creek. And I understand that people that live there have a real issue around that. And so do I. However, the whole lake is infected with milfoil. And if we let it go, we won't have much, and properties won't be worth very much money on Christina Lake. Do I agree something has to be done with the fragrant water lily? Yep. Do I know what it is? Nope. And the thing is, we need to try and find and get the province involved. And what are they going to do with it as well?
Okay, and so the next question is actually one that came at the very beginning, and it may be something that again, we may not be able to answer here, but I'll just pose the question. I know we're going to discuss it a little bit tomorrow with Laurie Tritchler, who's the reporter for the Grand Forks Gazette. He wants to know what actions the regional district is taking regarding the Forest and Range Evaluation Program report, which finds that Boundary and Rock Creeks excuse me, are not functioning properly. I understand these are in Area E, but here we are. Any comments on that?
Yeah, and I don't think we should comment on that, quite frankly. We haven't had a whole regional district conversation on that. And it is an Area E issue. So are we interested? You bet we're interested. Because even though it's an Area E issue, it at some point, or even now, is affecting all of us. Do I want to bring that in when we haven't, as a regional district, had that conversation? No, I don't think that's fair to even answer it, because we need to have the conversation.
Okay, so and Laurie knows that he can follow up with me to get
Absolutely.
responses to those at any time.
And he can follow up with me as well anytime he wants to. But right now, we need to walk through that.
Okay. And I'm going to start with, I'm going to go to a question that just came in from Erica regarding development. Any idea how many permits were issued for new builds last year?
Donna would know, maybe.
I do not.
There she is.
Sorry, I don't know the answer to that. Sorry.
And we don't have Brian Champlin on this particular call, who's manager of building inspection, but we will find out and we'll respond to that.
Freya, do you know that? New build on Christina?
I don't have the final figures yet for 2020.
So it sounds like nobody's got the numbers at their
Just-
fingertips. So rather
just
than
looking
guessing,
here
we'll find
Francis,
out.
just looking here for that. I might be able to get that in a minute or two.
Okay. And another comment about the fragrant water lily from another person. Absolutely need to get the province involved, and Teresa's requesting that a task force be struck. Okay, and I'm just scanning through, and Maureen, feel free to jump in if I'm missing any specific questions.
Can I speak to the water lily? I think this is something that would be really good to go through the Christina Lake Stewardship. They are stewards of the lake, and we do not own the lake. So I think my opinion would be to have that conversation with the Christina Lake Stewardship and see if we can strike a committee of some kind, or do they have people that we can lobby? And what does that look like?
You mind if I answer a question about the water for Jeanette Rempel? How often is water tested and where? I mean, for water systems, water is tested weekly within the distribution system, but for any kind of crown land water like lakes, I think that you'd have to contact the Ministry of Forest Lands and Natural Resources.
Yeah, and that is available. Parks checks that water all summer long, I think every couple of weeks. And that information is available online through BC Parks, I believe.
Okay, thanks, Gordon. And any other questions on any of the other topics you see here? Because I believe we have covered most of what has been asked as we've gone through the presentation. So maybe I'll move on.
Francis?
Yeah. Was
there a building permit question?
Good.
Was that building permits for Area C?
Yeah.
So for 2020, our stats are 32 permits were issued, and that is down from 44 from the year before.
And I'll bet it's way up now. I'll bet if we had the information, I think it was asked by Erica, I'll bet if we got a hold of Brian now, we would see those numbers are up. That's just my gut feeling from driving around Christina Lake.
Okay, so
Francis, I have there's two questions that are similar. Dennis is asking, what does the Boundary Integrated Watershed Program do?
I can speak to that. It's Donna. So the Boundary Integrated Watershed Service was created in 2018. Prior to that, in 2014, the Watershed Management Plan for the Kettle River was created. And we had a consultant that was doing the implementation of that. And then directors and the public, there was a referendum. We went to referendum on that, and then we established that service. And it has a $160,000 budget. Most of the budget, or part of that budget, is staffing. So we have one person, which is Christina Anderson, which helped out with the video there earlier. And so her job is mostly to deal with implementing that plan. She does education, she puts on webinars. She also looks for other sources of funding. So in 2020, we actually doubled the $160,000 almost. So we had $150,000 to do a flood risk assessment, flood hazard and risk assessment for the entire watershed. That project is just about wrapped up. And is also just recently submitted more applications for funding to update our floodplain mapping. And that will be, if we are successful in getting that funding, we'll have over $500,000 to do that floodplain mapping updating. There are a number of other things that she's involved with, but that kind of gives you a bit of a summary of it, and I'd be happy to talk to you more about that.
Okay, thanks, Donna. And T has asked if with the transit, can we get a quick poll for yes or no on the Christina Lake transit from today's group alone? Well, we did somewhat of a quick poll on how likely you are to support the service, and I can put that quick poll up on Join the Conversation as well for some broader public input if you like. I can do that. So following this meeting, we'll put up this presentation, and I can also put some of those polls up. And I believe, Maureen, is there anything else you've spotted there?
There is a question here, travel restrictions and neighbors with out-of-town visitors.
Yeah, there we go. That's the one I was looking for. Thanks, Gordon. So I think that might be for Mark Stevens or possibly for Mark Anderson, is to speak to the role of the RDKB in the COVID response, such as travel restrictions and so on, versus the province of BC. Mark Stevens, did you want to speak to that?
Yep, I can speak to that. So in terms of COVID restrictions, health emergencies under the Health Act and the Emergency Management Act are deemed the responsibility of the Ministry of Health and the local health authorities. So the regional district has very little to say or to do within the actual emergency. We're really just a supporting agency for Interior Health on this emergency. So all the restrictions that you see putting in place are coming from the Ministry of Health through their public health officer or health officials, Dr. Bonnie Henry, Adrian Dix, and then going down to our local Interior Health public health officials as well.
Okay, thanks, Mark. And
I have another question.
Okay.
It's from Dennis, and Dennis is asking if we are moving to internet meetings, information sharing, how can we assure that all of Area C had internet service, and is there any plan to improve this situation?
I can holler about that because I have been hollering about that, Dennis. Some service is better. Having said that, is mine and a lot of other people's service better? No. Do we need it to be better? Yes. And as far as I'm concerned, it's a God-given right now, and everyone should have half-decent internet service. That's a message we've been giving out to both the feds and the province. And I've been doing that through UBCM, as well as Diane Langman, our chair, sits on a committee. And Diane, if you want to speak to this as well, because that committee is also trying to get better service for everyone.
Thanks, Grace. Yeah, so I sit on the Regional Broadband Committee. It's now the Southeastern BC Regional Connectivity Committee. And we're encouraging everyone to take a speed test and make sure to record that. I think Grace was having that sent out through Donna's e-blast. So if you can go on, take a speed test on what your internet connectivity is, then we're trying to document all of that, because what we're hearing from the federal government is that everybody is okay, we're serviced well, when we know in fact that we aren't. So this is really important for all of us.
And I'll add to that as well, the interesting part about that is some people have no service at all, so they can't even measure it. So that's when it gets really interesting. And Dennis may be speaking to part of Fife that's in that position. Also parts of the lake on the other side of Christina Lake, boat access, plus people up toward Texas Creek. Some of them get zero. So having measured it is one thing for people who have internet service of some kind. But Diane, you might want to also give the message to that committee that there are people that have zero service. And this is in Christina Lake, not in the middle of nowhere.
Okay, thanks. And Maureen, I just lost my Q&A screen, and there was one other question there down the bottom.
Yeah, there's a couple.
Maureen, do you want to read those out?
Yes, here's one from Arlene. Do we have an update on any funding forthcoming for a grant to study water treatment services for the community?
That's a Goran question.
Yes, for the Christina Lake Water Utility, which is, I guess you would say, the community at the south end of the lake. We applied for a grant to bring in
Talking about
UV.
septic, Goran, she's talking about
Oh,
septic.
septics?
She's talking about a study, because we talked about redoing a study when we got some money, if there was some money, on a sewer system for Christina.
Oh. Okay. Well, I mean, we've discussed it over the years, but we haven't applied for anything recently. I know that in the future here, we're going to have to do an overall study on septic and where that septic will be taken to and disposed of, right, Janine? At some point, that's going to have to happen. So I think at that time, we're going to discuss that. Oh, your mute's on, Grace.
Yeah, we have done some work on this. We also
Yeah.
have it's a property that's designated for future sewer treatment. The last time
right.
we asked people if they wanted to do this, came back with overwhelmingly, don't talk to me about it. I bought extra property to pump my sewage back wherever. And that's been the answer most of the time we've asked that question. We have felt in the last few years that we might need to upgrade that information. So I think that is probably what Arlene is speaking to.
Yep.
Is there some grants that might be coming available that we could apply for to redo that information and ask more questions and do an in-depth study on Christina Lake septic system or sewer system?
Yeah, and it's something we're gonna have to look into. Yes, there is.
And I just encourage people, if you can put your questions in the Q&A, we're getting kind of a double whammy here through the chat now. So it's getting really difficult to keep track of. And there was a question actually going about the water supply.
Yeah.
Not the septic.
Right.
Regarding the barriers, the
yeah, and I provided a typed answer to that. But we did apply for a grant, approximately 900,000 to install second barrier in the Christina Lake community in the southern part of the lake, Christina Lake water utility. And we're also looking to increase capacity at the Wolverton Reservoir for fire protection. So in that grant, we should be finding out about that grant in the summer, and it's 100% funded. And I did provide a typed answer to that, I believe, earlier.
Okay, and we did have a question too, unrelated to water. We had a question about whether there's going to be any funding, and I can't find the question right now, but I'll just paraphrase it. Whether there's going to be any kind of through the funding for kind of food issues in the Christina Lake area, and that would be, I guess, a Donna question.
I think that was to do with the food hub. So maybe James wants to speak to that.
So just picking up there, the question was, were there any funding? Was that?
Will some funds be directed to the Christina Lake area? For the...
Yes, at this time, provisionally, I believe, because it's going straight off the top of the head, we have about $20,000 that we've allocated in the regional economic development budget, which Christina Lake is a participant in, to go towards supporting food hub activities. So there is some initial funding, and we'll develop that through the year.
Okay. And I'm looking to see if there's any more hidden questions here that I'm missing.
There's a couple. When is Cascade going to have access to high speed? Did we answer that one already?
No.
High speed internet such as Shaw and Telus Optic. It's terrible here.
I can jump in there. I don't think you're going to get that because there's not enough houses up here. Every time I've asked that question, I've been told we're not putting cable in because there's not enough houses.
And there's one more from the same individual, K&M Bogard. that was asked very early. Can we discuss the ISIS individual sponsored and living here?
Okay, so we're not going to discuss it. I will point you in the right direction. Just if you go on my Facebook page, you will see a link, and then you can click on that link and you can send your comments directly to the feds. They are the ones that are in charge of that. We have very little information on that. A lot of the information that is out there may or may not be right. Some of it probably is. I think it probably has been sensationalized a bit too. Were we aware of this? No, we weren't. I found out about it the same time everybody else did. So your comments need to go to the feds. And that's why I have provided that link. And I asked Donna to also provide it on the e-blast when she sends the e-blast out on Friday.
Okay, and with that, we've got 8 minutes left, and just with the various staff who are telling me that most of the questions I think have either been answered directly through a text response or we've covered on a similar topic. So in the interest of time and ending on time, I'll ask Mark to move on to our next polling question, and I'll just bring that up. One moment here. Bear with me. And this question is a little bit different than the others. You can't have a meeting like this and not acknowledge that we've all been affected by what's going on, and that's why we're all conducting the meeting in this manner. So we're just really interested to hear what are you most looking forward to? And I'd encourage the panelists to answer this too, once all this is done. Still got responses coming in. A few more still coming in. And I'm going to end it there. And I'm going to share the results. Can everybody see that?
Nice.
That's to be expected. Friends and family over food dinner. Who doesn't want that?
Totally agree.
Hugging. Going to
Hugging,
visit
yes,
family.
hugging.
Those are all things that we've all had to do without, for sure. And so with that, I'll get Mark to move on to our last slide, and I'll turn it over to Director McGregor just to say a few words before we head off to what remains of our evenings.
So of course, I thank everyone. I just can't believe the good turnout we had on this, and how many people have interacted and done it very, very well. So once again, Christina Lake, you rate pretty darn high as far as I'm concerned. So thanks being part of it. You know how to get a hold of me. I'm everywhere. Just holler if you've got a question, or email me or phone me, and we'll chat anytime. Will I be happy when COVID's gone and you and I can all look at each other and give each other a hug? You bet. So have a good evening. Enjoy every minute that you can. And we've had a very easy winter so far. I'm looking forward to spring. Thanks everybody for being part of it. And thanks to Regional District for bringing all the experts to the table.
And I'd also like to add to you, thanks, Grace, just saying thank you everybody for being part of our first experiment, which is our first virtual town hall. And we're going to be, by the next few, we're going to be much more slick. So hopefully that was fairly acceptable to people. And please go to join the conversation. You can tell us anything you like about how things went tonight, what you'd like to see, or anything you forgot to ask us or comment on. So thank you for being part of the first virtual town hall.
Yay.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.